saw my first video, this screen will likely look familiar. We used an application called IntelliJ, which is an IDE, as I explained in my first video. And if you haven't seen the first video and IntelliJ is completely new to you, or you just need a refresher on how to get here, you can watch my first video. I'll put a link in the description. I'll also have a link in the video that you can click. But let's move on from there. What if you wanted to write something a little bit more complicated than just a simple message down to a console window down here, like how we have my first Java application, which happens when you evaluate system.out.println my first Java application. So if we wanted to do something more complicated, maybe we would simulate a simple bank, let's say. And so in order to do that, we're going to need to store values. So let's say we want to store a balance, and then we're going to do maybe a deposit and a withdrawal and maybe something to check a balance. Well, let's go with the simple approach. So it'll get more complicated. There's a lot more things you can do with Java, but let's just say we were writing it all in the main method, which would not be ideal, but for learning purposes, we'll start there. So how would you add an integer into this main method? Well, we'll push enter. After that curly brace, we'll add some space, and now we will say int balance equals 0. So what is an int? Well, an int will store whole numbers, and it stores a range of whole numbers. There's other data types that can store whole numbers that stores a smaller range, such as a short or byte, but for now, for simplicity, we'll just use an int. We could have stored the decimal values as well if we were trying to track cents, but again, we'll keep that simple, so we'll come to those data types later. So now that we have this balance, let's say that we wanted to see what our balance was. We could actually print that in our message. So let's change our message and change it to say my balance is, and now I want to combine this message, which this is actually a string. So actually, let's move this up so that way you can see another type of variable. So now we're storing, again, a data type as a string. The name of our data type variable is message, and it holds the value my balance is. We'll put a space after this colon for when it prints the message to the screen. And then the int data type, the name of the variable is balance. Again, the value of that is 0, because when you're creating these variables, you have the data type, the name of the data type, equals to set the initial value and the value of that variable on the right side of the equal sign. And you need to end your statements in Java with semicolons. Okay, so we want to print this balance to the screen. So what we're going to do is we're going to take message, we're going to put it inside of our print line, and then we're going to use the plus operator because we're saying we want to combine the value of message with the value of, let's say, balance. And now let's run this. And now you can see down here in the screen, my balance is 0. So, what if we wanted to add other things? What if we wanted to be able to submit a deposit or a withdrawal? So, let's figure out how we could take in user input. So let's say that we wanted to take in a amount for a deposit. So we'll put another message here with another print line and say, how much would you like to deposit? And now in order to take in the value of this deposit, we'll use what is called a scanner in Java. So if you want to pull in a value, you're going to initialize your scanner like so. So we'll say scanner, and as you can see, again with IntelliJ, it tries to suggest to you what it thinks you're wanting to use. And so as you see here, it actually says .java.util. That is because that is what is called a coding library in Java, the location of where this scanner class exists. So we called our class application, and this scanner class, which is code that was already pre-written that we can also use, it lives in a location called java.util. So we'll go ahead and double click that. And now you see at the top here, it is importing that scanner class for us to use from, again, the java.util location. So now let's finish off the scanner. So we'll give the scanner variable a name. Let's just say it is input. And then we have to initialize it. So we'll say equals new scanner. And then when you're initializing the scanner, it needs to know what kind of value needs to go into this what's called a constructor. So it could take a readable and then a pattern, an input stream, and a readable input stream string. Again, we'll come back to these kind of things later, but just know that IntelliJ is helping you to figure out what you're going to put into these parentheses here. So for now, we're just going to start with system.in. And what that is going to do is it's basically just going to take an input stream, which is something that will come down from the system console here, and it will take the value of what you type here and store it in input. Now if you wanted to pull the value that is stored in scanner, we're going to add another line of code, and we're going to create a variable that we can store that value in. So we'll say int deposit amount equals, and now to access the value from the input variable we created, you'll see that there's different functions it pulls up that you can use. So in this particular case, it's suggesting to you next int, because we're going to store in an integer, and this makes sense, so this one we're going to use. And then we're also going to want to print this value out to make sure that what we're doing makes sense, so that way you can visually see that what we did does the intended results. So we'll add one more line of code. So again, we're printing another line. We'll say your deposit amount is, we'll add a space after, just to make it print in a more readable fashion. We'll add that deposit amount variable we created. We'll run this application. Down here in the console window, you'll see that it has now said my balance is 0 from our earlier message. And now it also added the extra line we put in there, which is how much would you like to deposit? And now it's waiting for input. So we're gonna just go ahead and say 100. I'll push enter. And what it did is it took that value into the scanner. It said the next integer value I got, I'm going to store a deposit amount, which it did. And then it prints your deposit amount is plus the value it stored, deposit amount, which down here you see your deposit amount is 100. So it worked. And we could expand on this further, but this gets us to the point where now we're not just printing a static string, we're able to actually take in a user input and print it to the screen, or potentially manipulate it later and take perhaps commands, and you could pivot off those commands to do other things, but this is a good starting point.